Hello and welcome to this Serial Geek TV episode commentary for The Shadow of Skeletor, an episode of He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, produced by Filmation Studios. Where to begin with this particular episode? Well, how about this? This action-packed, much celebrated episode was written by Ralby Goren. Yes, the same Ralby Goren that wrote the infamous circus-based episode The Greatest Show on Eternia, with Crackers the Clown. Hi everyone, I'm Crackers the Clown. Fans of the series, like myself, adore this episode, as you'll come to find out during this commentary. It's an epic tale that is best summed up with one sentence. Skeletor manages to start a war between Eternia's two moons, and Prince Adam nearly reveals to Teela that he and He-Man are one and the same. Yes, as I said, it's a rather epic tale, and as you just saw in the introduction sequence, this is a Season 2 episode with Hal Sutherland's credit replaced with a rather heroic shot of the three others that share the secret, which is always a very cool image to behold. This episode first aired over here in the UK on April the 14th, 1987, over 2.5 years after it had already aired in the latter half of 1984. For those that don't know, He-Man's second season was split into two halves, 33 episodes in 1984 and a final 32 episodes that aired alongside She-Ra in 1985. Sadly, I've never managed to own the script for this episode, only the storyboard, which doesn't reveal too many details not present in the episode. That said, I shall still regale you with information as best I can. And who do we have here? Yes, it's Manny Faces making his second of two appearances in the He-Man series. It's a great shame that Filmation didn't do more with the character, as I do think that there was still a lot of character depth to tap. He was actually due to appear in a rather amusing deleted scene with Ram Man in the episode Into the Abyss, penned by Robert Lamb, but that scene was removed for time, unfortunately. Actually, thinking about it, the 2002 cartoon from Mike Young Productions featured a great episode titled The Monster Within that was a Manny Faces-centric episode. And who wrote that episode? Larry DiTillio. Hence why that particular episode really feels like a Filmation episode of the 2002 series. And yes, Ram Man has now entered the scene in a rather spectacular way, as only he can. This is the first time we see these two appear in a scene together, though Ram Man does make a cameo appearance in the crowd in The Mystery of Manny Faces. And we soon come to learn that these two are pretty much best friends, even having nicknames for one another, Manny and Rammy, bless. Over the years, as you may or may not know, I've come to know writer Ralby Goren personally. Not only is he a great guy that doesn't take himself too seriously, even though he's won a Daytime Emmy, but as you can imagine, we've talked a lot about He-Man over the years. He once told me that the development of this script featured one moon. The head of the writing department, Arthur Nadell, came up with the idea for a second moon, and Ralby developed the war between two moons. I'd say he did a rather stellar job. We have a great action scene coming up here. Beastman is flying the Doombuster, and I'll talk about that ship in a minute. Let's enjoy this action scene unfold. Just listen to the dramatic music kick in as the Eternians look up, only to see the Doombuster hurtling towards the royal palace. It's so good.
They won't even talk to each other.
It's heading for the palace.
We have no time to lose. By the power of Grayskull!
And the transformation sequence begins. Now, He-Man is about to perform a rather silly feat, but for some reason we all seem to give this one a pass, but technically He-Man turns into an actual tornado, levitates and flies into the skies over the royal palace. Let's not think about it too much, otherwise we may get a nosebleed. I mean, we've seen He-Man turn into a tornado in other episodes, but usually he's acting more like an oversized drill. Oh, be sure to check out this animation here of He-Man throwing the Doombuster. This animator, whom after years of collecting He-Man animation art I've still yet to confirm their identity, always had a certain way of animating He-Man. You can see this style pop up in the episodes The Heart of a Giant, The Gamesman, Disappearing Dragons and The Arena. The key was how the animator illustrated He-Man's physicality, often giving him rather pronounced hands. Methinks I need to do a tad more research, figure out who the animator was and make a video about the individual. It's funny doing this commentary. Usually episode commentaries allow me to fill in certain scenes with some factoids or something. This episode moves at such a pace, the heroes have already boarded the Doombuster and have already encountered Beastman. Now check this moment out. Manny Faces is an actor, right? And so we get him impersonate Beastman. And with a cartoon, that just requires Lou Scheimer, the voice of Manny Faces, to step back from the microphone and let John Irwin, the voice of Beastman, do his thing.
Why, you mean like this?
Good.
And if you go back, as Manny Faces begins his Beastman impression, you can really hear John Irwin doing his Ram Man voice. It's so good. Manny's ability to impersonate others was kind of showcased, but more as a spectacle in his first appearance, where his face is spun around to reveal Skeletor and Beastman, complete with accurate voices. But I love how his talent is utilised in this episode. It's very unique.
Over and out! Yes, Skeletor.
Now, I mentioned I'd talk about the Doombuster a little more. So we hear the Doombuster referred to as far back as Disappearing Act in Season 1 and Double-Edged Sword, also of Season 1. But this is the first time the ship appears on screen, and it's an imposing sight. The funny thing is, originally, the Doombuster was the production name for the War Sled, the Sky Sled equivalents that were piloted by Skeletor's henchmen. The name Doombuggy was also used in scripts that referred to the War Sled. Eventually, the term War Sled stuck, though it was never uttered in an episode. This left the name Doombuster spare, and so it was given to this mighty ship of Skeletors. We see the Doombuster make a very memorable appearance in the episode The Rainbow Warrior, which, of course, I'll cover on this channel at some point. Emiliano Santalucia is a huge fan of the vehicle and ship designs of the Filmation show, and has, over the years, managed to acquire many development sketches and model sheets for the plethora of ships we see in the series. The early designs for the Doombuster were, let's just say, a bit much, with spikes protruding from all sides of the ship. Oh, and also it was known as the Thruster Buster. Yep. And now we have the acting abilities of Manny Faces taken to the next level. Manny Faces is now dressed up as Beastman, and yes, even in a fantasy show such as this, we have to accept that this giant device that surrounds Manny Faces' head can convincingly fit under a Beastman mask. Again, much like He-Man's spinning top impression, I can accept it in this episode. And yeah, Manny Faces and Ram-Man are still at odds with one another. I'm never quite sure how Cringer managed to get back down from where he was perched and fall asleep so quickly. I should mention that this episode is the first to reveal that Eternia has 2 moons, even though it had previously been established that only one existed. I'll come back to that in a short while, because we're about to encounter by far one of the best cliffhangers of the He-Man and the Masters of the Universe series.
It's a photon blaster cannon. And it's ready to fire.
We're done for unless I change into He-Man.
Tila will see your transformation.
I have no choice.
And here we are in Act 2 with the heroes seemingly doomed, leading Prince Adam to do one thing. Here we go, get ready. Cue the music.
By the...
Look! Now the cannon is moving away. We're saved.
I remember seeing this scene as a kid, and up until the moment when Ram-Man interrupts, I really believed that Prince Adam was about to reveal his secret identity to Tila and Manny Faces and Ram-Man. If you go back and watch the scene again, the direction by Steve Clark is utterly perfect. Prince Adam walks past Tila and strikes that all too familiar pose. So we, the viewers, have been trained to know that what follows is the unsheathing of the Sword of Power. But what sells the moment even better than the visual is the false music cue, because we hear those familiar opening bars of the theme song and think, oh my god, this is actually going to happen. And just as we're expecting a momentous moment in the series, the rug is so cruelly pulled out from under us, and the photon cannon that threatened their lives changes its aim, resulting in the secret identity being safe. But yes, it's a wonderful moment in the series that I think makes everyone smile. Good job, Ralby. Going back to the moons, because now we're treated to some establishing shots of the bright moon and the dark moon. The dialogue in this scene is frankly fantastic, as Ram-Man is used in the Orko role, in that he knows little about the moons. Thus, Prince Adam, Teela and Man-at-Arms explain to him, and by extension we the audience, the way in which the lives of the people on the two moons differ. But, speaking of the moons, this is where it gets a little messy. Because go back to the Season 1 episode Eternal Darkness. In that episode we saw Dark Dream, Evil Lyn and Tavor move Eternia's then one moon out of its orbit and onto a collision course with Eternia. Well, that could be explained had He-Man not thrown a giant explosive at the moon in order to move it. And let's fast forward to 11 episodes after this one we're watching, because in the episode Jacob and the Widgets, He-Man has to move Eternia's single moon with his hands in order to control the tides of Eternia. Now, on those two occasions, He-Man could not have been moving a populated moon, because that would be pretty messed up. And just when you think, well, these two moons could be different moons, the dialogue in this scene establishes that these are indeed the two moons that orbit Eternia, even going so far as to say that the Dark Moon is always positioned over Snake Mountain. So yeah, and let's not talk about the two moons in that beautiful shot from Into the Abyss, because we'll be here all day.
You call tidal waves and destruction of our historic buildings mere incidents?
And here we are meeting Professor Orion and King Barbo for the first time, and if they look familiar, well, they kind of should. Professor Orion is a character reuse of Prime Minister Pangus from the episode Song of Solace, and this is the odd one. Show many people just the line art of King Barbo, black and white line art, and they would all say it was King Tamask from the episode The Time Wheel. But in production order, King Barbo was designed first, and later his design was reused for King Tamask. It's probably the only time I can think of where a character reuse is far more recognised than the original. This is probably largely in part due to King Tamask having a rather pivotal role in the Time Wheel, whereas King Barbo is on screen in this episode for barely a minute. We next get a lot of exposition, but again, much like the previous exposition detailing the lives of the people of the Bright Moon and Dark Moon, we get some lovely dialogue that explains that for the last 2 years, the scientists on the Bright Moon have devoted their lives to building a large solar mirror that would deflect the light from the sun towards the Dark Moon, improving both the agriculture and lives of the people there. And when the heroes muse as to who would want to foil this wonderful relationship between the two moons, they realise it's the work of the Lord of Destruction. And speaking of which, this is one of those occasions in the Filmation cartoon that I believe the villain really lives up to his Lord of Destruction moniker, because he is causing a war between two moons in which, as we'll soon learn, much destruction has already happened due to those nefarious evil warriors of Skeletor. Now here's a fun little story for you, I hope. When this episode was repeated in 1989 on terrestrial television, I recorded the episode but missed the title card. Thus, I had to come up with my own title for the episode to write on the spine of the VHS. And do you know what I called the episode? War on Two Moons. Granted, it was nowhere near as thought-provoking as The Shadow of Skeletor. It wouldn't be until late 1995 when I first got online and found a website that listed a bunch of He-Man VHS releases. No images, just text. And I mused that maybe this episode was titled The Shadow of Skeletor, though I was unable to confirm this until a year later when famed tape trader Scott White began sending VHS tapes to me. Hurrah! One thing I should point out about this episode is the way in which Beastman is written. Granted, he's nothing like his devious, traitorous self that we saw in the initial batch of episodes from the first season, but he's also not the comical Beastman that we've seen more than a few times in Season 2. Aside from his earlier mistake with the Doombuster, Beastman is somewhere in between the aforementioned two takes on the character, and when Manny Faces plays the role of Beastman, he leans more towards the savage henchman rather than the comedic one. Yeah, we'll soon see Skeletor blast him, but that's because as Manny Faces, he needs to learn more about Skeletor's plan of action. And I love this image of Skeletor appearing over the evil warriors. I'll let the dialogue play out because Skeletor's end of scene line should have been featured in TV spots for the cartoon because it's that good.
I want war!
How cool is that? I want war. That's the Lord of Destruction. And yeah, here we get to see a never before seen part of the Royal Palace. Man, those Filmation artists knew how to design and paint gorgeously detailed backgrounds, didn't they? The level of detail. And hey, going back to what I was saying about Beastman, we're about to see the savage henchman use his brain in a rather clever way, figuring out that given that the escape bars are electronically controlled, by destroying the power lines he can actually free himself. And because this is Beastman, he does it in a rather spectacular way. You know, because he can control wild animals. Something that Rowlby included in 2 of his 4 scripts. The animation seen here on the appearance of Beastman's pterodactyl ally was previously seen in Like Father Like Daughter, albeit with a different colour scheme. Oddly, I have the entire pencil sequence of Beastman leaping onto the back of the pterodactyl and the pair flying away. I say oddly because it kind of landed in my lap one day. I should feature it on the channel because you get to see the level of detail put into those little character drawings of Beastman. Nice moment here with Prince Adam using his role as Prince of Eternia to halt the war between the 2 moons, King Barbo respecting King Randor and Queen Marlena, and by extension him, and so grants Adam the time to get to the bottom of this mystery. And it may be a little heavy-handed to some, but I do love that Rowlby Goran uses the war between the people of the bright moon and the people of the dark moon, and the fact that they should be able to find peace as a kind of allegory for the falling out between Ram Man and Manny Faces, causing Ram Man to ponder the fact, as we see. And so yeah, Prince Adam is on his way to the Dark Moon. I should talk more about this interesting mix of villains. We have Skeletor and Beastman, of course, but also Evil Lyn, Merman, Trapjaw and Whiplash. And thinking about it, and believe it or not, I've never actually realised this until this moment. If you were to replace Whiplash with Triclops, you'd have my favourite assortment of evil warriors, the Diamond Ray of Disappearance grouping. Thankfully, 8 episodes from this one, 3 on a dare, will see those 5 reunited and defeated by He-Man, of course. I love this upcoming moment because we hear a brief range of the late great Linda Gary's voice talent when Evil Lyn demonstrates how she transformed herself into a peasant girl. Her vocal range changes from harsh and aggressive to light and fluffy.
I was a witness. I turned myself into a peasant girl and told the king I saw the bright moon people do the destruction.
Goodness, what a voice actor she was. We're so fortunate that we got to hear her vocal talents across many Filmation shows. Now, this gorgeous upcoming imposing shot of Skeletor and Beastman, when I used to visit the Filmation warehouse, I actually saw this cell, but it was damaged due to the shadows being painted as an opaque on top of the cell, and someone had not understood that when pulling the cells from the boxes. Shame. Oh, and when Prince Adam unsheathes the Sword of Power, the camera actually holds on him saying Grayskull before panning up. Usually the camera pans up to the sword as he's saying Grayskull.
By the power of Grayskull!
There you go, you knew you were going to get a super geeky little fact to this episode, and it had everything to do with a simple camera move. And the most powerful man in the universe is back. Thinking about it, He-Man is barely in this episode, and yet, due to the strength of the story and everything that occurs, without an ongoing He-Man presence, it's still great. Evil Lyn using her power to transform Merman into Moonrock. Actually, thinking back to the 2002 Mike Young Productions cartoon, that was still one of the most shocking moments in the series, when Snakeface turned Merman into stone and the villain fell over and shattered. I remember exclaiming at the TV in shock. Man, I really do need to cover that series on this channel at some point. I mean, it's pretty much 22 years old now, yikes. But it had some great episodes, plus I contributed a little. Anyway, sorry, back to this commentary. He-Man crushed by a rockfall. Oddly, this scene was used in a TV spot in syndication. I remember putting the TV spot on the old He-Man and She-Ra episode review website, which means I still have the video files somewhere. The TV spot had the He-Man and the Masters of the Universe logo superimposed over the shot of He-Man holding the boulder above his head. And who doesn't love this wonderful, ludicrous piece of action? Ram Man rams the boulder on which Evil Lyn and Whiplash are perched, all the way back to Snake Mountain. I mean, how does that even work? gravitational pull, outer space, the fragility of life. Thankfully, the pair appear in the series again, so they made it back safely, somehow. If there's one thing I'm critical of with regards to this episode, it's this ending. The episode is called The Shadow of Skeletor, and his presence has loomed over the story as it's supposed to. But when he finally shows up in person, it's all very brief, and this battle with the most powerful man in the universe should be a tad longer and far less of a throwaway. I remember as a kid being very confused by this final shot. He-Man aims the cannon at itself and fires. You can just about make out He-Man leap out of harm's way, but as a kid I kind of thought he'd killed himself. No joke, because the camera slowly trucks in towards where he stood, almost in memoriam. Imagine if this episode had been the last of the series. We'd have had debates online for years about whether or not He-Man accidentally blew himself up. There's a really nice attention to detail here. Even though he's not present in the storyboard, the artists insert King Randor overseeing the peace treaty. It's really awesome to see that. And of course, Manny Faces and Ram-Man are firm friends again. Manny and Rami are a team for the ages. Though we'd never see them on screen at the same time in an episode again. Except in the epic panning shot in the He-Man and She-Ra Christmas special. Coming up, we're about to see Manny Faces and Ram-Man deliver the moral segment. Do you recognise the location behind them? I'll give you a few seconds. This location is Merman's underwater cavern used in Search for the VHO and City Beneath the Sea. A really bizarre background choice. So yeah, The Shadow of Skeletor. With this script, Ralby Goren crafts a fantastic story that draws its strength from Skeletor's desire for war. As I said before, this is one of the brief times in the series that he truly is the evil Lord of Destruction. This episode has numerous stories, all of which complement one another. The fallout between Manny Faces and Ram-Man, Skeletor's unique plan, Manny Faces' infiltration of the evil warriors, the heroic warriors' peace mission. All that said, this script sensibly chooses to focus on the events of the story rather than character development, resulting in one of the most exciting episodes of the series. Bravo, Ralby Goren. And that's the end of this episode commentary. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please be sure to like, share and subscribe, and I'll catch you on the next one.